Dear old work platform, it's not you, it's us. Actually, it is you. Endless onboarding? Constant IT bottlenecks? We've had enough. We need a platform that just gets us. And to be honest, we've met someone new. They're called Monday.com, and it was love at first onboarding. Their beautiful dashboards, their customizable workflows got us floating on a digital cloud 9. So no hard feelings, but we're moving on. Monday.com, the first work platform you'll love to use.
Average is not invited. Not if you're holding your company off-site in Las Vegas. We aren't on friendly terms with the bare minimum, and unenthusiastic is uninvited. Las Vegas's creative energy and world-class hospitality want to bring your company off-site to crazy new heights. That's why fear-based leadership is afraid of Vegas, and boring won't be there, but it will be watching the meeting recordings later. Plan for the extraordinary at vegasmeansbusiness.com.
Welcome back to another episode of Investies. I'm your host, Linda Garcia. This week on the podcast, we will continue our conversation on tariffs. There have been some relatively significant updates that I want to unpack. I also want to take a look at how tariffs work, who pays for them, and why this has been an ongoing strategy for Trump. I am recording this episode on Monday, February 10th. It is another week of early recording for me. We release every episode of Investies on Fridays, and typically our recording day is on Wednesday. We are working diligently to get a studio up in Austin so that I can go back to my normal recording days. Thank you so much for bearing with us as we move through this transition of me living part-time in Austin. We're trying to make it work as best as possible, so same as last week, check the news to see what has changed since Monday, February 10th. Last week when we spoke on the podcast, we found out in real time that Trump had entered negotiations with Mexico and that the tariffs for Mexico would be paused for 1 month while they ironed out negotiations. The same thing happened for Canada. So there is 1 month pause on tariffs while they are negotiating. Now, tariffs for China did kick in last night. Those tariffs were an increase of 10%. Also last night, Trump announced that he was going to introduce a new tariff on aluminum and steel. So this is what is dominating the news cycle this morning. So far, we have a relatively positive reaction in the market. I want to break this down. Now, we touched on this a little in last week's episode in terms of the impact on tariffs and how that could potentially create inflation. I feel like a lot of us have learned a lot about tariffs during the entire Trump campaign and how it is actually us Americans who are going to pay the tariff if a tariff is imposed. I want to break this down a little further. A tariff is a tax on imported goods. Let's use Mattel as an example. Mattel is an American company, but it uses other countries to manufacture and produce their toys. So let's say that there is a new run of Barbie dolls that are coming in from China. Mattel will have to pay a tax to the United States because it is receiving its material or its goods from China. By law, the importer is responsible for paying the tariff. So in this example, Mattel is responsible for paying the tariff for the Barbie dolls it is importing from China. And while it is a law for the manufacturer to pay that tariff, there is no law to protect the distributor or the consumer from paying the tariff down the line. And that is, in fact, what happens. Mattel will increase its wholesale prices over to a retailer like Walmart or Target, and then Walmart and Target will increase their prices for us as consumers. The tariff is paid to the United States. To be more specific, the tariff is collected by the Customs and Border Protection, which is a division of the Homeland Security. The money goes directly into an account for the U.S. Treasury. The Treasury is responsible for collecting revenue for the United States government. Okay, it's really important for us to understand that the United States government looks at tariffs as revenue. It's also equally important for us to understand that we are in major trouble when it comes to our United States deficit, okay? When it comes to the amount of money that we are spending as opposed to the amount of money that we are making. We are in trouble. And this is something that we cannot ignore. The United States deficit is the amount by which the federal government spends more than it receives in revenue. The deficit for fiscal year 2025 was $700 billion. This is a $201 billion increase from the same period in the fiscal year 2024. We're in trouble. And so we absolutely need to find ways to increase our revenue. We are, of course, watching the deficit continue to increase, but more importantly, as of February 7th, 2025, the United States national debt is $36.22 trillion. And this debt is incurring interest. Can tariffs be the answer to all of our monetary woes? Donald Trump really seems to think so. He said in his inaugural speech, President McKinley made our country very rich through tariffs and through talent. Let's take a look at history to identify how much tariffs have actually contributed to the federal revenue of the United States. In a report from the Congressional Research Service that looks into all of the federal revenue that is generated, there is a statement that says, over the past 70 years, tariffs have never accounted for much more than 2% of total federal government revenue. President McKinley, the president that Donald Trump addresses in his inaugural speech, was a president 130 years ago. So perhaps President Trump is on to something in aggressively increasing tariffs in order to generate more revenue and diminish our deficit. When we look at the history of tariffs and why tariffs were originally used, we actually can identify that tariffs were a principal source of government revenue. I think Trump might be onto something. No, wait, just kidding. Tariffs used to be the primary source of income because we didn't have income tax until 1913, proving to be a much more lucrative form of generating federal revenue. Tariffs, as a reminder, in the last 70 years have never driven more than 2% of federal revenue. Meanwhile, in 2023, individual income taxes were 48.5% of revenue. Payroll taxes, 34.9% of federal revenue. Corporate income taxes, 11.4% of revenue. Knowing what we know now, processing the statement made by Trump, President McKinley made our country very rich through tariffs and through talent. Honestly, I don't even have the words. I give up. I honestly give up trying to. I don't know what to say here. Let's take a break.
Would you wear the same shoes for every occasion? Or rock the same outfit 7 days a week? Of course not. Your style is better with options. Your investments could be too. SIBO Index options give you access to various contract sizes, global trading hours, and potential tax advantages. That's a good look for any portfolio. If you're ready to invest in style, head to betterwithoptions.com. There are risks associated with SIBO company products. Review the disclosures and disclaimers at SIBO.com/US_disclaimers.
Sergeant and Mr. Smith, you're gonna love this house.
Bunk beds in a closet?
There's no field manual for finding the right home. But when you do, USAA Homeowners Insurance can help protect it the right way. Restrictions apply.
Trump seems to believe that imposing tariffs is going to be the solution to everything. As I mentioned this morning, he announced the tariffs on steel and aluminum. Now, if you remember, we have a pause right now, and we are in negotiations with Mexico and Canada for tariffs. However, with that being said, let's talk about who the biggest steel and aluminum exporters are. Let's first take a look at steel. Coming in first place is Canada, second place is Mexico, and third place is Brazil. When we look at aluminum, in first place is Canada, and it is so far ahead that it is not even worth mentioning the other countries because they dominate in exporting aluminum. We have to remember that we are currently in negotiations with Canada and Mexico. There is a pause on imposing 25% increase in tariffs while we figure this out. It feels to me that the announcement of imposing aluminum and steel tariffs is a direct attack again on Canada and Mexico, given that those two countries are the biggest exporters of this material to the United States. Now, the stock market is having a positive reaction on this. Let's talk about why. The United States, as of right now, stands to be the biggest beneficiary of these tariffs because it can potentially increase steel production in the United States. And so a lot of the rally that we see right now in the market is coming from steel companies in the United States. So it makes sense that as of right now, the stock market is having a positive reaction because we also produce steel in this country. However, I don't think that the market is really pricing in the consequences, because the reason we acquire steel from other countries is because it's much cheaper than production in the United States. In my opinion, the market's reaction is very much one-sided. There will be consequences to these tariffs. The first consequences that we should take into consideration are the ones that we learned last week, which is if you impose tariffs, tariffs will be imposed on us. So we are currently waiting for the response of Mexico and Canada. Here's the other thing that I also think is important to consider, and maybe there is a strategy here that Trump is using, okay? Because I got really curious in doing all of the research for this week's episode. Despite Canada and Mexico being the biggest exporters of steel and aluminum, they are not the largest producers. The largest producers of both steel and aluminum exponentially is China. That is the plot twist that I am going to leave you with, my friends. We shall see how Canada, Mexico, and China react to these steel and aluminum tariffs, and we will continue this conversation as the weeks go on. This has been the biggest topic on all news cycles. Everyone is worried how bad tariffs will impact not only our relationships with other countries, but how this is going to generate more inflation and potentially break the economy. I went to an economic outlook at the Federal Reserve Bank last week for the state of Texas, and of course, there was a deep concern for tariffs and the potential of a trade war as well as the trade for Luka Doncic. You're listening to Investies. This is a Cosmic Standard and In Luz We Trust production. A special thank you to the team, Asia Simpson, Eliza Smith, and Jacob Winnick.